You must be wondering why out of the blue, Israel and Palestine started a conflict at such a large scale with so many people losing their lives. The major question is, why is this even happening right now? People across the world are divided by their support for Israel or Palestine based on their understanding. Even Twitter in India had two hashtags, India with Israel and India with Palestine, trending on the same day. But to really understand the whole situation, you need to go back thousands of years and know the core of the issue, which is what I'm going to tell you about in this video. A lot of people are unaware of this, so please make sure that you watch this video fully and understand the conflict so that you can educate those that don't know about it. Please share this video with as many people as possible so that nobody takes a side without being educated. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel with the notification bell on so that you can stay updated. Back in the ancient times, the current location of Israel and Palestine was called the Holy Land, as it had sites sacred to Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and a few others. This region has come under various empires over the years with different ethnicities. However, the land was predominantly Jewish, roughly from the 10th century BC to the 3rd century BC. Around the 4th century, the Romans adopted Christianity, which led to Christians being the majority for over 600 years, despite the Arab Muslims conquering the empire by the 7th century. Then came the Crusader period, from the end of the 11th century to the 13th century, which was a series of religious wars to get control of the Holy Land from Islamic rule. But by the end of it, the land became dominated by Muslims, with Arabic as the dominant language. Before the First World War, this region was under the control of the Ottoman Empire for nearly 400 years. Towards the end of the 19th century, Palestine was dominated by Arab Muslims, with smaller numbers of Christians and Jews. At that time, most of the Jews lived outside Palestine, predominantly in Eastern and Central Europe, with communities in other parts as well. The increasing oppression against Jews in other parts of the world, such as Russia and Europe, led to the birth of Zionism, which was a movement by the Jews to have their own state in Palestine. But why Palestine? Because it was the birthplace of the Jewish people and where their identity was shaped. This is where the roots of the conflict began. The need for a separate state for Jews was seen as a threat by Arab leaders in the Palestine region. The Jewish people slowly began acquiring Palestinian land, leading to the eviction of farmers. This increased the tensions between both parties as the Palestinians had to move away from their own land. This in turn led to protests in the region, as a result of which the Ottoman authorities banned land sales to foreigners in 1892. In 1917, during the First World War, the British government issued a public statement known as the Balfour Declaration, announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Keep in mind that at that time, the region only had a minority Jewish population. After the end of the First World War, the region was conceded by the Ottoman Empire to the British. In April 1920, the mandate for Palestine was assigned to the British by the League of Nations and called for the administration of Palestine and Transjordan by them. But Palestinian Arab delegations rejected both the mandate and Balfour Declaration and demanded national independence. During this time, the restriction on purchasing land set up by the Ottomans was done away with, and the Jewish community began to acquire more land in the region. This period was marked by intercommunal violence and deaths caused by both sides. The first mention of the two-state solution came in 1937, with the Peel Commission proposing a plan for dividing mandatory Palestine between Palestinians and Jews. The Jews reluctantly accepted, but Palestinians and other Arabs in the surrounding regions opposed it. The rejection by the Arabs led to the British creating the Woodhead Commission to examine the proposal. The Peel Commission was ultimately rejected because it would result in large transfers of the population. Finally, The British came up with a solution which significantly reduced the number of Jewish immigrants allowed to enter Palestine by establishing a quota. In 1939, the sparks of the Second World War were lit, and with it, a migration of Jews from Europe to mandatory Palestine seeking refuge from the Holocaust. By the end of the Second World War, a crisis over the fate of the Holocaust survivors from Europe led to renewed tensions between the Jewish and the Palestinian leadership. While the British established immigration quotas, illegal immigration and Zionist insurgency against the British were on the rise. In 1947, the British left the land and decided to let the United Nations attempt to curb the violence in the region. The United Nations came up with a partition plan for Palestine, recommending the creation of independent Arab and Jewish states and a special international regime for the city of Jerusalem. Neither side was satisfied with the partition plan. The Jews disliked losing Jerusalem, but most of the Jews in Palestine accepted the plan. However, the Arab leadership argued that it violated the rights of the majority population in Palestine, which at the time was 67% non-Jewish. A large number of Arabs would have been trapped in the Jewish state. As soon as the UN voted in favor of the partition, Palestinian Arabs reacted violently against the Jewish population, and it soon escalated into a civil war. In 1948, in the middle of the civil war, Israel declared its independence. This sparked a full-scale war where the armies of Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Iraq, 4 out of the 7 members of the Arab League, invaded the newly declared State of Israel. The war ended in an Israeli victory, with Israel annexing territory beyond the proposed partition borders. The Gaza Strip went to Egypt, and the West Bank, along with East Jerusalem, went to Jordan. Around 7 lakh Palestinian Arabs fled from Israel and became Palestinian refugees. In the 3 years after the war, about 7 lakh Jews came to Israel, many of them expelled from their Arab states. For almost the entire period from 1950 to 1967, there was violence, including attacks on civilians by the Jordanian army, Palestinian militants, and the Israeli army. In 1967, after years of threatening gestures from Egypt and neighboring Arab nations, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, which, along with what followed, became known as the Six-Day War. This ended with Israel taking control of West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan and the Gaza Strip from Egypt. The declaration of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza gave rise to new issues in the conflict. Due to the lack of governance in Palestine, the Arab League initiated the creation of an organization to represent the Palestinian people. The Palestine Liberation Organization was founded in 1964 with the purpose of the liberation of Palestine through armed struggle. Initially, as a guerrilla organization, the PLO made several attacks against Israel in the 1970s and early 1980s. To Israel, the PLO was regarded as a terrorist organization, but for the Palestinians, PLO was their savior. After the Six-Day War concluded, Israeli settlers began to occupy land in the West Bank, Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem. In 1972, over 1,000 Israeli settlers lived in the region, which increased to over 8 lakh settlers as of 2020. Numerous UN resolutions hold that Israeli settlements in these regions are a violation of international law. Israel, however, does not consider the occupations as a violation as it had effectively annexed these areas. As the Israeli settler population grew in the 1980s, Palestinians in Israel began to protest their marginalized position and agitated for national independence. This gave rise to the First Intifada in December of 1987, a Palestinian uprising against the Israelis. Led by the UNLU, the Palestinians responded with protests, civil disobedience movements, as well as violence against Israeli defense forces. The Intifada lasted until the Madrid Conference in 1991, which was an attempt to bring about an Israeli-Palestinian peace process. However, many believe the 1993 Oslo Accords to be the end of the Intifada. From 1982 to 1991, the PLO was exiled to Tunisia and became far less effective as it was away from the Palestinians. The Israeli government and the PLO began secret negotiations in January 1993. The PLO was ready to recognize Israel's right to exist and officially give up terrorism. During the Oslo peace process, both sides were obligated to work towards a two-state solution and try to reach a mutual agreement. The main features of the Oslo peace process were the establishment of an autonomous governmental authority to administer Palestinian communities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Palestinian territories, and no violence against each other. However, the hope for peace was short-lived. Violence between Israelis and Palestinians escalated after the accords were signed. The agreement was opposed by the Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups, who at this point were already committing suicide bomber attacks throughout Israel. The people of Israel were also not happy with this agreement. Tensions were rising due to terrorism and loss of territory, which led to the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin by a right-wing Jewish radical. After the assassination, the peace process slowed down considerably as the newly elected government in Israel took a step back. The Palestinian authorities blamed Israel for not living up to some agreements in the Oslo Accord. As violence grew between the two groups, the conditions for peace negotiations became even harder. In 2000, then US President Bill Clinton made an attempt to bring Palestinian President and the Israeli Prime Minister together for negotiations. The Israeli Prime Minister offered the Palestinian leader 73% of the West Bank and the entire Gaza Strip in return for the 69 Jewish settlements in the West Bank. The issue of the Palestinian right of return would also be solved through significant monetary reparations. However, East Jerusalem for the most part would have fallen under Israel, which the Palestinians demanded complete sovereignty over. The Palestinian president rejected this offer and did not propose a counter. No conclusion could be made that would satisfy both Israeli and Palestinian demands. This led to the Second Intifada in September 2000. This was a period of intensified Palestinian-Israeli violence, resulting in thousands of victims on both sides. The failure of the peace process and the eruption of the Second Intifada, which included increased Palestinian terror attacks on Israel, mostly by Hamas, led much of the Israeli public and political leadership to lose confidence in the Palestinian Authority as a peace partner. Following the severe economic and security situation in Israel, a new government came to power in the country in January of 2003. The newly elected government initiated a temporary truce and endorsed the roadmap for peace put forth by the UN, European Union, United States, and Russia. The roadmap for peace called for an end to violence and settlement activity, establishing a Palestinian state and accepting Israel's right to exist. In February 2005, Palestinian President and Israeli Prime Minister agreed that all Palestinian parties would stop acts of violence against Israelis, while Israel would cease all its military activity against the Palestinians. This was considered as the end of the Second Intifada. Israeli Prime Minister Sharon ordered the removal of Israeli settlers and soldiers from Gaza. Israel declared an end to occupation. As part of its disengagement plan, Israel retained exclusive control over Gaza's airspace and territorial waters. It also continued to monitor the borders and blockade the coastline. Palestine, around the same time, was also going through internal political conflict. Following the natural death of PLO and Fateh Party leader Yasser Arafat in 2004, Mahmoud Abbas was elected president of the Palestinian National Authority. The Palestinian Authority and Fateh Party officials were accused of not using billions of dollars in aid to develop Palestinian society. These allegations increased popular support for Hamas, which was often perceived as more efficient and honest because it had built various institutions and social services. The strengthening of the Hamas organization amongst the Palestinians, the gradual disintegration of the Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli disengagement plan led to the change of the Hamas movement in early 2005, which started putting greater emphasis on its political characteristics. In 2006, Hamas won a majority in the elections and came to power. Israel, however, refused to negotiate with Hamas since Hamas continued its belief that Israel has no right to exist and that the entire state was an illegal occupation, even though the organization expressed openness to hold a long-term truce. European Union countries and the United States threatened an economic boycott if Hamas did not recognize Israel's existence, abandon terrorism, and support the peace agreements signed between the PLO and Israel in the past. Hamas was considered by Israel and 12 other countries to be a terrorist organization and therefore was not entitled to participate in formal peace negotiations. In 2007, a conflict broke out between the two major parties in Palestine, Fatah and Hamas, which divided the Palestinian Authority into two. Various forces which were affiliated with Fatah engaged in combat with Hamas in numerous gun battles. As a result, Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip and Fatah took control of the West Bank, forming a new governing coalition. After Hamas won the elections, Israel sealed its border with the Gaza Strip, preventing free flow of people and many imports and exports. Remember, the majority of Gaza's water supply, electricity, and communications infrastructure was provided and controlled by Israel. In June 2006, during a well planned operation, Hamas managed to cross the border from Gaza, attack Israeli troops, and launch numerous rockets from the Gaza Strip into southern Israel. Following the incident, fighting broke out between Hamas and Israel in the Gaza Strip. In September 2007, Israel declared Gaza a hostile territory. The declaration allowed Israel to prevent the transfer of electricity, fuel, and other supplies into Gaza. In June 2008, a truce was established, but it did not last for more than 6 months. On one hand, Hamas blamed Israel for not lifting the Gaza Strip blockade. On the other, Israel accused Hamas of violating the truce with frequent rocket and mortar attacks. Israel started an intensive bombardment of the Gaza Strip, targeting Hamas bases and police headquarters. Civilian infrastructure was also attacked. Israel said that many of these buildings were used by combatants and as storage spaces for weapons. Hamas intensified its rocket and mortar attacks in Israel throughout the conflict, hitting previously untargeted cities. Amidst international criticism and the concern of further casualties, Israel called for a ceasefire in January 2009, which was reciprocated by Hamas. The entire conflict resulted in the death of around 1,300 Palestinians and 13 Israelis. The Israeli Defense Force reported that the vast majority of the dead were Hamas militants. However, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights reported that majority of the dead were civilians and non-combatants. In October of 2011, a deal was reached between Israel and Hamas by which Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, who was captured in the initial raid in 2006, would be released in exchange for around 1,000 Palestinian and Arab Israeli prisoners. In 2014, another war between Israel and Gaza occurred, resulting in over 70 Israeli and over 2,000 Palestinian casualties. Violent clashes have been going on to this day, including military flare-ups between the Gaza Strip and Israel. Israel continues to retain control over Gaza's airspace and blockades its borders and coastline. As you know from the events of the last few weeks, the status of the conflict remains unsolved and contentious to this day. There are two main schools of thought when it comes to a solution to this conflict. The first is the two-state solution and the other is a unified state solution. In the two-state solution, the main contentions comes with the West Bank settlements for Palestine It would leave their land broken both geographically and administratively due to the Israeli settlements which have been allowed with direct or indirect help of the Israeli government. The West Bank is divided into Area A, Area B and Area C. Area C contains 60% of the West Bank's land and all of the Israeli settlements. Israel plans to enforce its sovereignty over the settlements along with an area near the Jordanian border which approximates to 30% of the total land in the West Bank. The Palestinians believe that the annexation would prevent their access to essential water resources and key agricultural land, particularly in the Jordan Valley. There is also a disagreement from both sides as to preferring the 1947 versus the 1967 borders for a two-state solution for Israel. For them, it wouldn't be as simple a solution as to vacate the area due to complicated logistics and investments that have gone into the region. Handing over the entire West Bank to Palestinians is seen as questionable by Israel because that would leave all present Israeli settlers stranded in the Palestinian Arab land. When it comes to the unified state solution, for the Israelis, certain part of the population feel that if a one-state solution is passed and all Palestinians in the region are given citizenship to Israel, it could potentially lead to the Jewish population becoming a minority in the region down the line. For the Palestinians, they want to retain their national identity and have the right to self-governance. The Palestinians in the West Bank live under Israeli military rule and are denied construction permits. They feel disenfranchised with respect to heavily limited approvals and the split state of land under them. They have been made to feel like second-class citizens due to restricted access to infrastructure in the region and having to pass through security checkpoints and constantly being under suspicion. The East Jerusalem situation only makes it worse. There has also been a scarcity of essential resources such as water for Palestinians relative to the Israeli settlers. The Palestinians say this would remain a problem based on the present record. Gaza remains under blockade following the Israeli disengagement from the region and Hamas coming into power, which is equivalent to collective punishment of the population according to the UN. There is also ongoing violence from Gaza into Israel, which often results in civilians being injured. Hamas also initiates reactionary retaliation to conflicts between Israel and the Palestinian population in areas outside of Gaza. Israel too is party to ongoing military action against the region of the Gaza Strip, which has resulted in widespread destruction of property and estimates of significant civilian casualties. Israel justifies its actions as necessary to act as a deterrent and as a retaliatory justice. If you're still here, thank you so much. I really hope that this video was able to help you understand the conflict better. And please make sure that you like this video and subscribe to our channel with the notification bell on so that you can stay updated.